Hey Hal, thanks for joining TekAngels' first edition of Fireside Chat. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us, Mark. TekAngels has been a big player in the community. The team's always been there to help kind of boost the Vietnamese startup ecosystem. So we're happy to participate and kind of share our story to all the readers and followers out there.
Fantastic. So let's get right into it. Can you tell us what Vietcetera does?
Yeah, so Vietcetera is a content platform. We share stories about Vietnam. And the mission is to bring Vietnam to the world and the world to Vietnam. We're a media company as well in that we kind of share stories specifically to a Generation Z and millennial audience. But at the same time, why I could describe us as a content platform is that we have a number of products coming out soon that will allow a community of creators to be built and shared on Vietcetera.
Oh, fantastic. Where did you get the inspiration for this? Or how did you guys get started?
Yeah, people ask us a lot because Vietcetera, even the name, as you could probably guess, is not your typical name. I mean, the name itself is a combination of the words Vietnam and etc. So it's kind of describing Vietnam and so on. When we first started 3.5 years ago, actually I had just moved to Vietnam. I came here to work for a venture capital firm, and I understand some of the language and obviously the customs and food, but to me, Vietnam wasn't really a place to work necessarily, so it was a very foreign concept to me. So when we started with my co-founder, who's still working with me, he's the web developer and designer. He's also Vietnamese overseas, Vietnamese Belgian to be exact. He was born in Vietnam, went to Belgium, came back. And so we came together wanting to just share what was going on in Vietnam. Like, he had the more idea of kind of sharing the tourism aspect of it and the lifestyle aspect of it. I wanted to bring more of like the business stories of Vietnam. Between the two of us, it was a really great opportunity to work on this full time. But it took us another 2.5 years to have the clarity of vision that we have now about where we're going. Because we started off in English, but now we also have Vietnamese, and Vietnamese is the focus of the company. So it's all guns firing as of like this time last year.
Fantastic. Well, can you tell us a little bit about that in terms of the pivots that you've made and refining your offering?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of founders and potential founders and people that want to work in the startup community, they have this kind of belief that startups just came out of nowhere. Like, oh, I have this great idea for a company, let's do it. Day one, everything starts executing, the team comes together, the revenue comes together. In my experience, and from a lot of the startups that I personally know, or even the ones that we've read about, that's definitely not the case. And that's what happened at Vietcetera. So like I mentioned in the beginning, when we started the company 3.5 years ago, it was very much a blog. It took us another year to have any money or have a business plan, really. And then it took us another year before we decided to focus on Vietnamese language. So the whole evolution of the company is we started off English only. A year later, we started advertising, and then we launched Vietnamese. But the main language of the company, internally and externally, was English for a very long time. And so the big change we made was this time last year, we changed the domain to point to the Vietnamese site first. So if you go to directly the website, you type in your URL search bar, vietcetera.com, it goes to the Vietnamese content, and there's a little English flag in the corner, which you use to toggle to English. That was a big perception change to all the new readers that we're getting. But it also was a signal of intent for us to really become a major player in the content space in Vietnamese language. After all, we are here in Vietnam. So that was the biggest pivot at the company. We had to restructure the team internally. We had to move around a lot of headcount, move around a lot of internal process, but I wish I did it earlier. And now that we're executing with this kind of vision in mind, we're building on top of that. So the foundation, I feel like now, is very strong, it's very clear, and it all just started with focusing on Vietnamese language. The evolution of getting there actually took quite a bit of time.
Wow, okay, yeah, interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about what is the business model currently of Vietcetera?
Yeah, it's no different than most other media companies. We rely on advertising and what we call branded and sponsored content to generate revenue. And the third piece of the puzzle for our revenue stream is our strategic consultancy. It's a fairly even split between the three, probably a little bit more heavy on the content, branded content side. The branded and sponsored content, that's where brands pay us to create content on Vietcetera. But we like to do it in a native advertising way, meaning that it's kind of like flows into our content. It is not necessarily sticking out too much in the form of like the voice is different or it's like very clearly an advertorial. We want to produce value for both the reader and advertiser when it comes to branded and sponsored content. So an example of that could be, right now we're creating a lot of content with this prop tech company that's investing in obviously the real estate market. And so we're co-creating a lot of content with them about real estate in Vietnam, and they're sponsoring it. And the third and final piece of our kind of revenue strategy is what we call our strategic consultancy. We're building an ecosystem where brands can work with us on a number of different things. The strategic consultancy, it has a number of different kind of parts to it. One of them is influencer marketing. So we work with influencers and brands to help match them together and sometimes even host that content on Vietcetera. We've done that with a number of brands such as Tinder, such as WeWork, and the list goes on. And there's also just more hands-on consultancy. For instance, we work with brands like Swire Group. It's one of the largest real estate firms in Asia, where we're helping them kind of better understand the Vietnamese market and some cultural things that they're not too familiar with for a number of different projects that they're working on. So the strategic consultancy is, think of it as like a market entry consultant where we help brands better access the Vietnamese market, or somehow they're hoping to derive kind of insights about Vietnam for other purposes.
Okay, great. Well, and so far, can you tell us a little bit about the traction that you've had with the brands? You were mentioning a couple of brands that you already have. Can you tell us how many you have and things like this, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing for us, because the more that we grow the website, the more clients and readers that you get in general. So we've been growing pretty consistently between 15 to 20% month over month, like the last year, if not more in some cases. And the more exposure that you get on the reader level, it also opens more doors for you commercially. I think lifetime, we've had probably around 100 clients. I would say about 20% of them are recurring, meaning they buy very regularly with us. It depends on the size of the company, obviously, too. Okay.
And what is your reader growth, or you're mentioning like what is that metrics, right? And how many readers do you have, and how has that grown, and how do you see as a challenge growing that number?
Yeah, we have about 500,000 monthly active readers. It's April now, so we're projecting right now that number to be between 550 to 600,000. So like I was saying, 10 to 20% month over month growth. It's been growing a lot the last 12 months because of that whole change I was talking about earlier, focusing on Vietnamese language. But the English content remains to be very important to us because it allows us to reach a lot of international decision makers. So it's like the same audience, but different. The Vietnamese content, I would say 95% of our readers are Vietnamese reading the Vietnamese content. They're millennials and Gen Z. And then on the English side, it's international business people like you, Mark, who are maybe trying to discover and understand Vietnam a little bit better. I think all of us are always constantly doing that. But also overseas Vietnamese, people that are Vietnamese blood but born overseas. Keep in mind, there's an estimated 5 million overseas Vietnamese. So that market is very large in itself. And then you also have travelers who I think Vietnam welcomed, I could be very wrong right now, but I think it was like 10 million visitors in 2019, and it's expected to grow like 20% year over year. I mean, obviously 2020 with COVID, that number is going to go down, but largely speaking, over the last decade, the number of tourism and travelers, just visitors in general to Vietnam, has been skyrocketing. So for us, we want to create content for the low-hanging fruit, which is the Vietnamese audience, and we feel like we're filling a niche where there's not a lot of high-quality content for that millennial kind of audience in Vietnam right now.
Sure. I agree. That's great. You mentioned COVID. I think that we have to address the elephant in the room. So, how has the global pandemic and the situation affected your business?
Our business has definitely gone down a little bit. I think from a revenue basis, we're down about 20 to 30% on a monthly basis, which is a lot, but it's a lot better than a lot of other companies, I'm sure, that are suffering much more than us. We're very, I guess, resilient in the fact that we're a digital business, so we don't have a lot of overhead that's fixed or tied to physical assets and inventory. A lot of our kind of costs are just payroll related. On the flip side, how COVID has benefited us is that our readership has gone up. So I was saying earlier that our growth keeps going up month over month. A lot of that is due to the behavior changes that COVID is creating. So it's not actually related to the COVID content necessarily, because we don't actually publish that much related to COVID specifically. But what we're seeing is that a lot of people are spending more time in the evening, for example, at home. And so instead of going out, instead of doing this, doing that, they're actually reading Vietcetera. More people are just spending more time online. And given that we're kind of one of those media companies in Vietnam right now, we're in the process of how do we build that behavior now? So we've both benefited, but also suffered from COVID. I mean, we're also very lucky in that we raised a venture round not too long ago, just a few weeks actually, just in the nick of time, because I think if we try to fundraise now, it would be very challenging. But we did raise that round, which has allowed us to continue hiring. But like all other companies, it doesn't mean we're just free flow spending cash. We have had to take a number of measures to control things. I've cut my salary by 50%. We've cut a lot of expenses that are kind of not directly relating to business performance. So that's enabled us to continue growing.
Congratulations on the raise. I'm sure that having completed that raise has been able to remove some level of stress, at least, because you do have like money in the bank, which is a good thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? What were the challenges that you faced in raising?
Yeah, so we started in December and we got everything essentially done by the end of March. So it was about a 3-month process. And as I was saying earlier in this chat, like I used to work in VC, I used to work in startups, but I didn't really realize how difficult it was to fundraise until this moment for me, individually as the executive, pitching to investors and managing that whole flow. I think it's not easy. Mm-hmm. Do you feel a sense of relief when it's done? Actually, no, because that's when the pressure just kind of picks up. I think it's a nice milestone, but it's not necessarily like you can start partying and everything's done. I think now's the work that's happening. And I think the burden of cash flow management is now less, I guess you could say. You have cash in the bank, you can protect it. So it's more of a proactive approach that we're taking now. But yeah, the whole process, I think, again, unique to Vietnam, is that you're a big fish in a little pond. If you believe in yourself, you have a good team, you have a good product vision, and you can execute, there are deals to be found. There are firms out there that are funding startups because they need to. That is their directive. I moved here 4 years ago to work for a fund that was one of the first, I guess you can call, pioneers in the space. They had a fund of $10–15 million. There were very few startups even out there at the time, and yet they still managed to find companies to invest in. For us now, in the moment, there's hundreds of millions of dollars more of liquidity out there in terms of just fund amounts, and their directives are to invest in Vietnam. I don't know the numbers on top of my head, but if you're a company at any stage that fundamentally is a good business, pre or post, hopefully mostly post-COVID at this point, you can fundraise. But just wait a month, even wait 2 months. Don't rush into it now, because nobody's going to be pulling out a check unless you've already had a conversation with them.
Right. And how many investors did you speak to get to that one investor who invested?
Well, one advice I would give to companies just starting their fundraising process: keep a database, keep a tracker, which I did not do. Luckily, I like to think I have a pretty good memory, but I probably spoke to at least 30 to 40, I would say. But a lot of those firms just didn't match the investment criteria for my company, as in maybe it didn't fit the sector like perfectly, or maybe the fund size was too big for what we are trying to fundraise, or even is the fund matching our total addressable market? So thinking realistically too, when you filter out, it's like lead qualification. If you're a good salesperson, you always do lead qualification. You're not trying to cast a huge net and try to talk to 100 people and 100 leads. You're just trying to talk to maybe 10 or 20 or 30. I didn't do that process like by the book, I guess you could say. I got better about it in the last 6 months, and when we really honed in the last 4 months, our fundraising strategy, which ran in parallel with our product development, we found very good success. We always got to like the final round, or like we're speaking with the GPs at length about our business. I think we got to that stage with about maybe 8 or 9 firms, and then well, at the end of the day, we got commitments from 2 of them in addition to our angel investors. But if all things stacked correctly, we could have had all of them say yes potentially. It just came down to who said yes first, how big was the round, because not everyone wants to lead or co-lead the round. There might be too many leads. You have to kind of pick the right one. But yeah, I think it was a really rewarding experience for me at the end of the day. Fantastic.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. I think we're getting to the end of our time here, and I want to thank you for taking the time and talking to us today. Do you have, just as parting words, maybe some advice for founders, some mistakes that you wish you had avoided, or something that you'd like to leave us with?
I think this applies more to starting a business as a whole, and you can even say it applies to Vietnam specifically, but I would say don't get too excited and don't pull the trigger until you've done your due diligence. I think on paper, everything looks exciting. The opportunity, maybe your future business partner, maybe that employee you're about to hire, but just like check around a little bit. And that due diligence process, it could take 10 minutes, it could take a few months or whatever it is, right? Depending on what the opportunity is. But in my case, I look back to all the things that I've done in Vietnam, and I've started other businesses here in Vietnam as well. Some that were very successful, some that were a spectacular failure. And it always comes down to what happened that I wasn't happy about. It was because I didn't do the correct due diligence. It could have just taken me 10 minutes. It just could have taken a phone call. It could have just taken a Google search or whatever it was, but I just didn't do it, and that led to losing a lot of money or a lot of time. I think time is the most important thing. So anyways, to go back, my advice, just do your due diligence.
Okay, all right, well, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks Mark for inviting us. Anytime, happy to be here.
Fantastic. All right, good luck.
All right,
thanks.
All right, thanks Mark.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Bye.